had been one of the greatest nations in the whole world at that time, the whole Middle East. At the time of Solomon, there was no more powerful nation. They were even more powerful than Egypt or any of their neighbours. Okay? And then suddenly, gone. What happened? And so that's our goal. So first things first, Solomon. What do we know about this guy? What do you know already? He's known for wisdom. What tells you, there's something in your Bible that tells you that his wisdom is respected. Actually, there's 3 things in the Bible that tell you his wisdom is respected. The book of Proverbs is almost exclusively written by Solomon. Then, he is known to have composed something like 3,000 songs that made it to the Bible. What's that? The Song of who? Solomon. Then, what else? He's the author of the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? All these are all wisdom literature. So, he's heavily quoted in the Old Testament. He's there a lot. What else is he known for? Wisdom, a lot about that, right? What else?
Wives.
Wives. I thought that would come up first. Wives. Not just wives, he wasn't satisfied with just wives and concubines, okay? Does anyone know how many he had? In total, between wives and concubines, 700. That's right. So guys, would you like to keep more than 2 wives happy?
I don't have that much money, maybe.
What do you think your chances are of getting away with that? My vote's 0. Anything else? Is he known for anything else? Yes, but you missed one at the moment. You can cheat and look on the top here if you like.
Spirit when we
finish. Okay, let's put that. That's really important. So he starts well and he ends bad. Yeah, but he did something. Really? Yeah, he built a temple. Which one? Temples that they've been so far. No, he built the first one. So he built the original temple. It was destroyed completely by the Babylonians. Okay, so the temple that Jesus goes into is the temple that was rebuilt after the Babylonian captivity. Yes. So when you read Ezra, Nehemiah, all that, and Zechariah about building the temple, they're actually rebuilding on the site of the destroyed first temple that the Babylonians destroyed. Okay? So Solomon builds the original temple. What came before the original temple? What did you have for a building? What did you have? A tent. It's called the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle. So they never. Why a tent? Why didn't they have a building? This is a trick question. Because they're moving. Remember? Because he gave them the law in the middle of the wilderness. And he told them to build a tent. So whenever they stopped to rest, they erected the tabernacle and put the ark down in it. And as long as they stayed in one place, they worshipped there. And then when they moved on, packed it all up again. So the first thing is like mobile. But once they reach a place called Zion, and they conquer the people there, that was the promised land. And that place called Zion in the Canaanite language is what became what? Jerusalem. Okay? So when you hear about Zionists, people talk about Zionists, they're using the old name for Jerusalem. Zion is the original name for the real estate that Jerusalem sits on. But the original inhabitants can't claim it back. Why? Something God instructed and the Israelites did to the letter. Why can't the original inhabitants claim it back? Because they're extinct. Because God told them not to leave any of them alive, because they were really evil people. So the original inhabitants were completely extinct. Okay? So these are the things most people know about Solomon for. And if you think about Solomon just lightly, would you say on the scale, does he strike you as sort of famously good and helpful and a good king, blah, 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 or the opposite? What would be your impression? More good, isn't it? And if you ask generally in the church, that's probably the answer you would most common get. So the surprise is he is mostly wicked. So he has this really good reputation that he doesn't actually deserve. And that's part of why we have to really look a little bit carefully at him to understand how something as disastrous as 10 of the 12 tribes vanishing could be the outcome, really beginning with what the supposedly good guy. When you think about it, if I said I could wave my magic marker, Raniel will get wise, rich, sleepless, and be pretty good at knocking up real estate. You go, the world sees all this as positive. This is because these are the things the world is after. Money, power, blah, 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 blah. So that's partly why Solomon has this great reputation, because all of the nations around knew about Solomon. Do you think Solomon's restricted to Judaism and Christianity? Where else he's like a major prophet? He's a major prophet in Islam. The Muslims treat him as a major prophet. The wisdom literature in particular, Proverbs and that, it's all part of the Quran. And a whole lot of other pagan faiths also treat Solomon as really, really important, like a super spiritual guy, which we'll come to after. How could that be? Well, mostly it's because what they are attracted to, these things which to the flesh seem so amazing. Make sense? So that's why it can be a bit of a trap. You can think, Solomon must have been a good guy. God's man and everything. Let's look closer. The first lesson, though, is being great in the eyes of the world does not necessarily mean that you're great in the eyes of God. There's no question that Solomon was great to the point of probably being close to the greatest ever in the eyes of the world. In the eyes of the Egyptians, in the eyes of everyone. Right? Solomon was, we'll come to that in a second. So, to see how he comes around, we have to look at his father, who was David. What's special about David? Kill Goliath. Yeah. What else? Man after God's heart. So, who was he for Israel? Why is he really extra significant for the Jewish people? Apart from that, how many kings have they had? Just Saul. How did Saul work out? Not so hot. Right? And remember, they had asked for a king. There hadn't been kings up to then. They had judges. But all the nations around them had kings, and the people said to God, how come all the nations have kings, we don't have a king? Let us have a king, you're anointed. Right? So God let them have a king. Saul didn't pan out like they were hoping. Right? So who's David? He's the second king. What makes him different from Saul? He's really chosen by God. Actually, Saul's chosen by God as well, but God makes a big thing of choosing David. If Saul and David were standing next to each other, what would you notice straight away? David's a little wimp. He's a little stick insect. Saul is what you expect. He's a big warrior, right? Remember when he goes to fight Goliath, what is he offered? The king offers him his armour. What does David say? I can't even stand up in that. I'll put that on or die. That's before the battle. Remember when we did the Beatitudes? Who is blessed? Who does Jesus say are the blessed? Is it the strong, the rich, and the powerful, and the proud? No. It's the weak, the crushed, the lonely, and the poor. that whole message starts with David. Well, it doesn't actually start there, but God brings it back to their attention that he chooses just a regular guy, even less than a regular guy. He's not even amongst his own brothers. He's the run. Remember when the prophet is going along, God sends him to Jesse, choose one of his sons I'll tell you which one, and they're all big and strong, right? And he's like, is it this one? No. Is it this one? No, and then none. And then Jesse says, oh, I have got this one other son, but I didn't bring him because, he's just this little run. He's out looking after the sheep, And when he comes, God says, this is my anointing. Remember, it's quite important why. Remember what God said to the prophet? I do not judge by outward appearance. We judge the thought and intent of the heart. So it's the opposite of K-pop. God is not moved at all by how good looking you are, how tall, how successful, and particularly God couldn't really marginally care less how the world sees you. God doesn't take the opinions of other people about you into account. Something in the New Testament tells you that. Does anyone remember? This is slightly off topic, but it says in the scripture that Jesus did not need the testimony of anyone about a man, for he knew what was in their heart. In other words, God doesn't consult others about you. Why? Because others are usually completely wrong. God only takes his own opinion because he looks to where other people can't even see. Who you are inside. So that's why he chose David, and he picked someone deliberately against the expectations of the world. Why was David so successful? Because God was with him. How does that appear in the New Testament? Nothing is impossible with your own strength. There's heaps of things. So that's just that same principle again. So if you're a Christian, what should you not waste your time trying to be? Don't waste your time trying to be big and successful as the world. At best, it's just a waste of energy. Be Christian inwardly, then you can be certain that God will be with you. And then whatever needs to be done will become possible, even where no matter how wealthy and how popular and how everything you otherwise were would have remained impossible. Okay. So David, he has this idea that he should build a house for God in Jerusalem. Does he ever get to do it? No. Can anyone take a hazard a guess why? It's not just one thing, but just in a general sense, why does he never quite get around? Because remember, he's king for a long time. Why does he never quite get around to even putting a foundation stone down for this temple that it's David's idea? David prays to God and says, I will build you a house, and everyone will worship you in it. Can you remember what God says to him? The first thing God says is, you think you can build a house that can contain me? That's like Johan offering to lend me one of his t-shirts. Nice gesture, but there could be some logistical issues. That's the first thing God says to him. You can't contain me in a building as the other nations put their gods, which are just stone idols. So the first thing is, the creation rests in my hands. That's how big I am. So first thing, you can't just fit me in there. And besides, there's a problem. And we read it. Who'd like to read 1 Chronicles 17, page 1 there? It's not real. Holly, do you want to have a verse in there?
Yeah. Okay. I declare to you that the Lord will build a house for you. When your days are over and you go to be with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. I will never take my love away from him, as I took it away from your predecessor. I will set him over my house and my kingdom forever. His throne will be established established forever.
Okay, so what does the first thing God say to him? It's not going to be you. I'm going to take one of your, but I promise to take one of your children. So the first reason, real reason David can't is because God won't permit it. He won't empower David to accomplish it. And we'll see why in a second. So that's the first thing. Because a lot of people wonder why Solomon, why not David? Well, the first thing is because God literally would not permit David. He says, I'm going to raise up one of your sons, and I will be with that son, and he will be like a son to me. Because God was with him, he will be. So it had to fall to this son that God already knew to build the temple, and that turned out to be Solomon. There's a weird thing though. Solomon's the third king, right? Saul, David, Solomon. You think of the royal family now and any royal family throughout history. When the king dies, who's the next king? The eldest. Solomon is number 5 in the sons. Number 5, not number 1. He's the 5th. Does anyone know who his mother is? Sheba. What's the problem with? Well, we'll see that in a second as well. The first thing I want you to note is, can I have this off? Is Solomon isn't the guy that you would expect. It should be the eldest son, right? And guess what? The eldest son thought that as well, funnily enough. But when David is still alive, so normally you wait for the king to die, right? But while David was still alive, you had like Shortland Street on steroids. There is the eldest brother, his name is Amnon, and he's from one mother, from another mother, the third son, so he's the first son, the third son, his name is Absalom, and he had a sister, Tamar. Different mothers, both fathers are David. He raped her, his half-sister. He raped her. He murdered him as a result. The first son, gone. The second son, we hear about his birth. Well, he's so hardly spoken of, I can't remember his name. Hang on, I'll remind myself. I can't even find it now. I'll come to it in a second. There's another that starts with a C. There's the actual second son, he just dies. There's virtually nothing written about him. He's sort of born and then he just vanishes. So it's presumed that he didn't do or achieve anything, and it's also presumed that he probably just died of natural causes before David. So by the time it's in the story, he's already left the story somehow. But in such a nondescript way, they didn't even bother saying how. Okay? So that's why you get the first, and then the third son becomes the next one. What does this guy do? When you murder the heir to the throne, what normally happens? You have problems with the cops, isn't it? So he had to run. He ran into exile. But while David was still alive, he starts a coup. He comes back from exile and he convinces the people that he should be king now, even though David's still alive, because David was really old and sick. So he didn't wait. Should be this guy because he's the eldest now. What do you think happened? Anyone know? He starts a coup, and then God tells David what to do about his own son who's rebelling against him. There's a big battle, and this is like something from a comedy movie, except it had a sad ending. Absalom is running from this battle that's not going very well on a donkey. And he gallops the donkey. Donkeys can move quite fast if they want to. So he's rocketing along it like as fast as donkeys go, under a tree. Guess what happened? There's a fork in the tree. And he rode into it. And his head got stuck, and the donkey rode out from underneath him, leaving him hanging in the tree, stuck by his neck in the fork of the branches. And he couldn't get down. David's soldiers found him and killed him. Gone. Okay? Now, God made this other promise, which we'll see in 1 Chronicles 22 right at the bottom. Who wants to have a go at that? Diane, do you want to have a verse to that one?
Solomon is young, the Lord said, and I will make preparations for it. So David made it, and he called for his son Solomon and charged his son, I had it in my court, and will grant Israel peace and quiet, and will build a house. My son, the Lord be with you, and may you have success. Will give you discretion and understanding the Lord, and be strong and true.
So one of the things you read in Proverbs, written by Solomon, is many are the schemes of man, but it is the will of God that prevails. Can anyone tell me something about all the prophecies concerning Messiah? It's very important. Messiah is the ultimate king, isn't it? You've got Saul, David, Solomon, then a whole lot of others, but ultimately the last final, what do they all have prerequisite for? It's in the covenants God swore with the patriarchs, including David. The same line, the line of Judah, particularly David. He has to be, every king had to be in the line of David. David is of the tribe of Judah. So he has to be of Judah, and more than that, he has to be in the line of David to be king. That's why the New Testament, your Gospels start with those long genealogies. Because if you're a Jew reading it, the first thing you want to know is, does Jesus qualify? So if his line doesn't go back to David, he's just out, regardless of how many people he rose from the dead. He just can't be Messiah unless he's in the line of David. Do you notice this promise that Diane just read out? What is God saying to David about Solomon that might strike you as interesting? Isn't it this? You will have a son, and his name will be Solomon. Solomon's not born yet when this promise. So even Solomon's birth is prophetic. And he says, and he will always reign. I will establish his throne, and his throne will always be the only valid throne over Israel. You might think that's a new promise. It's not. Actually, he's repeating a promise he already made to David. You will always have a man on the throne. Your house will always have the throne. So he's actually confirming to David that you're going to have a son. You already had heaps of sons. We're going to have another one. He's going to be called Solomon, and he will be the king. Because we're not even run out of sons yet. There's another one, Abiah, or Adoniah rather. Adoniah. And he starts a coup as soon as David dies. Because he's the next oldest. He starts a coup. You think it's going to succeed? He actually has most of the people with him. The only ones that aren't really with him is Solomon's mum, Bathsheba, David, who's about to die but not quite dead, and the prophet of the day, Nathan. David was terrified of Nathan. Why? What did God do with, I think I've included this somewhere. How did David get to marry Bathsheba? He didn't directly kill her husband. Remember, he saw her and he was smitten with her appearance. He hadn't met her, he saw her at a distance. So that's the first thing. He judged outward appearances. He decided he had to have her. What's that? That's coveting your neighbour's possessions. That's idolatrous. That's adultery. She's already married to Uriah. I always get confused that, oh, you're too young to know that band, Uriah Heep. You want to know that? Right? You won't. Very young age to know that. How does he get rid of Uriah so he can get Uriah's wife? Well, Uriah is actually one of his most loyal and competent soldiers. So he sends him on a suicide mission. A suicide, like a military mission, that really is, it's almost a given that he's going to get killed. But he's so loyal, he goes on this mission, and what do you know? He gets killed. So now Bathsheba's a widow, so under the law, her husband's dead. she can remarry, and the king summons her and says, "Don't worry, you won't be a widow for long. I've decided to take you as a wife, not the wife, no, another wife." Remember, all these sons have different mothers. Remember, we've done this before. There's nothing in the Jewish law that says one man, one woman. It's one man and as many women as he's married to. That's under the law. So all these were legal wives, but just not one of them. Bathsheba's added, right? They have a child. What happens to the child? Doesn't live. God strikes the child dead. Why? Because that child is the product of adultery. Because whilst no one else knows, God saw it all happen and knew the motivation of David's heart, that it was all together. Bathsheba didn't even know that basically the dude she's marrying bumped her husband off. You know? But God saw. How did David find out that God saw? Because Nathan came and said, what if a great man had a servant who only had one possession? It was a little lamb. And then the day came when the great man was holding a banquet. And though he owned many sheep, he said to that servant, "Kill your sheep for my banquet." You know, it's my banquet, but I want you to pay the cost. Let's eat your sheep, the only thing you have. And the servant was so faithful, he did that. Then Nathan says to David, "What would you do if you found out about that?" Oh, David's incensed and say, "That's just criminal. That's bring that great man to me. I'll chop his head off. I'll sort him out." And then Nathan says, "You are." And then he relays to David what God has seen him do. The only possession that Uriah had was Bathsheba. David could have had all the women in Israel. But he had to take Uriah's only possession from him. And he used Uriah's loyalty to do it. So, of course, now David is just stricken with guilt. You can hide from it. And he knows that Nathan knows. Nathan doesn't tell anyone, just David. But his whole life, David would never cross. He might be king, but Nathan was God's messenger. If this happens, Adoniah is raising this rebellion, and God speaks to Nathan, and Nathan instructs Bathsheba and David what to do. And what do you know? The coup fails. Why does it fail? Because of what Diane read out. God made an unconditional promise. Nothing, if you look at what Diane read out, there's no conditions in that. God just says, "I will cause the following." No conditions, just a statement of fact. So it didn't matter how many wicked men came along to try and have a different ending. None of it was ever going to happen, only what God said. So Absalom's gone, you can add. So suddenly, the guy who was actually fifth in line, his real name is this, Shlomo. Shlomo is his Hebrew name, Solomon, Shlomo. Now, if you imagine that you're a bit drunk, and you tried to say something and it came out Shlomo, what does it sound a bit like? Like as if you're saying another word but you're a bit drunk. What does it sound a bit like? Shalom. Shlomo and shalom are from the same root. Man of peace. This is peace, this is a man of peace. Shlomo is born to Bathsheba after David repents. Before he repented, the child he had with Bathsheba, God took away because his sin had separated him from God, you know? So God's favour was withdrawn and God wasn't going to bless something that was born of wicked. Truly repented, because his repentance was very real. Then God gave them another. And remember, God had already named him before he was born? God knew he was going to be born, and his name means the man of peace, through whom peace with God will be reestablished. Okay, so that's where Solomon gets his name. So that's how it comes to pass that someone who's actually fifth from the throne ends up king. No one in Israel would have expected Solomon to be king. He'd be like, who's the guy that's coming? Prince somebody? Harry. You know? Way down the line. You never know. A couple of murders. He could be next. Like I say, it's like Shortland Street on steroids, you know, back then. Drama. But the lesson is, when God makes an unconditional promise, that is what happens. It didn't matter what Amnon tried, Absalom tried, Adoniah tried. All these men that are like, you would think are going to change history. Once God had said it, that's the only outcome that could follow. And you'll notice this promise that Diane read out has two parts. The first part's unconditional, which is he'll be born, his name will be Solomon, he'll be the king, and I will ensure that his throne lasts forever. Which, as I mentioned before, God is just actually repeating the promise he'd already made to David about his throne. In other words, your house, David's house, there'll always be a son on the throne. Why? Because your ultimate son will be the last and final and permanent Jesus. But the second part isn't unconditional. If you have a look on page 2, from verse 11, you'll see that he starts talking about obedience. If you are careful to observe the decrees and the laws the Lord gave Moses for Israel. If, as soon as you see if, suddenly everything's changed. The bit about blessing, the bit about peace and all the rest, conditional. That he would be king, unconditional. That he'd be born, that his name would be that he'd be king, unconditional. God would force that to happen. But the rest was conditional on him keeping the law. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, remember what we were talking about, that one of the really important things he's known for is building the temple. And it was a pretty amazing place. Do you know there was only one door in the whole temple that wasn't gold and brass for a particular reason? So even all the doors are lined with pure gold. Mostly the buildings built out of cedar. Cedar doesn't grow in Israel. Cedar was like the super expensive wood of the day, and you had to get it from what would be today we would call Lebanon. So in its day, cedar from Lebanon was like the most expensive timber you could get. The whole temple was built of the most expensive materials money could buy. So he's famous for building God's temple and the palace and a few other things. But here's the thing you probably don't know. He built a temple for Molech. Remember, you hear about people sacrificing their children in the fire to Molech? He built a temple to Ashtaroth. And to the other one I can't remember. And. Not just 3, like hundreds of temples he built to all these foreign gods. Remembered for this, but he also did all this. Which brings us to our next topic. So he's famous for that, and it's like people turn a blind eye, but the reality is he also built pagan gods. Right? The next topic is wives. Why would he build that? Well, ask the wives. So the very first thing, I'll read this on the bottom of page 2, 1 Kings 3. The first thing Solomon did when he was king, after David died, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instruction given to him by his father David, except that he kept offering sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. The high places are significant. That's where pagans went to do their rituals, tops of hills. So mostly he's doing what David said. Mostly he's following the commands of Moses. But he's got this bad habit of practicing religion like the pagans. What's the very first thing he does when he's king? He goes to Egypt to get a wife. What's the problem? Is she Jewish? Does she worship Yahweh? Do you think he loved her? Very unlikely. Why? Why did he go to Egypt? Who was the biggest threat to Israel usually? Egypt. How do you make peace? Well, it still happens today. Well, it's certainly in more recent history in the last few hundred years. If I was always having gunfights with Pat's dad, but then I thought, I'm sick of that. So what I do is I work out how to marry Pat. Because then, for him to have a gunfight with me, he's having a gunfight with his daughter's husband. And it's like, maybe not. That's the thinking why these kind of marriages happen. If you become kind of family, even though you really got nothing in common, via a marriage, then wars became much less likely. People look for other ways around because, internal family politics didn't approve of going and making war on your daughter's husband. Loveless things, absolutely loveless things to purely arrange for economic, civil, political gain. And when you look at the history of the crown heads of Europe, probably 80 or 90% of all the marriages, strategic alliances sealed by a marriage, suddenly made your former rival your in-laws. Now you've got something in common, stop being wrong. Love doesn't come into it. Understand? First thing Solomon does, but he doesn't stop there. He's got this wandering eye. And I will come back to him in a second. The next thing he does is he goes and has a chat. You'll see on page 3 there, 1 Kings 5. When Hiram, king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys to Solomon. Because he had always been friendly with David, Solomon sent back this message to Hiram. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. Remember, that's what, right at the beginning when he started, that's the first thing God promised to David. I'm going to do all this for your son, and I'm going to cause all his enemies to be at peace with him. So during his reign, there will always be peace. So there's not peace because Solomon's especially good at politics. There's peace because God had promised David unconditionally. We go down to verse 6. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My man will work with yours, and I will pay you for your man whatever wages he set. You know that we have no one skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians, people from Sidon. When Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was greatly pleased and said, Praise be the Lord today, for he has given David a wise son to rule over this great nation. Hiram is the king of Tyre, and he controls the adjacent place, Sidon. You hear about Tyre and Sidon quite often in the New Testament. So a reference back to here. Does anyone know what made Tyre and Sidon so important to the story? Why would the second thing so he makes peace with Egypt through a marriage, then he's straight up to what we would call Lebanon, to see the king there, Hiram, to do a business deal. Cut me all the timber, I'll pay you whatever you want. Be my supply base, because there's no cedar in Lebanon. Right? You know what else came from there? Gold. Not a bit of gold, tons and tons and tons. Why? Because Tyre had a fleet of ships, unrivaled at the time. They had a virtual monopoly on sea travel in terms of trading. And they used to go to a place called Tarshish, which I think we've mentioned before. And Tarshish was where the purest gold came from. And because they were so wealthy from trading, they could afford this gold. So by making friends with Hiram, he got the timber and the gold for the temple. And because he paid him, he was happy to pay him a lot for it, he also got peace. No point having a war when the guy's already paying you. So again, you could say this is kind of a wisdom, to make peace above you and peace below you. Remember, this is to your north, Egypt's to your south. They've got all this timber and gold turning up. Sounding good so far? Like he's doing well? In a worldly sense, you go, oh yeah. You know, if he's a politician or whatever today, you go, oh yes, he's doing very well so far. Have a look at the second box from the bottom on page 3 at what the gold income that Solomon received from Tyre as a tribute every year. It was 600 and what? 66. This is about 19 metric every year. His reward has the number 666. With the gold, he built a very famous throne. It's so famous that every other nation that eventually would invade and capture Jerusalem. So the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Greeks, everybody, the first thing they wanted to do was to capture that throne. Solid gold. It weighed maybe 10 tons, but it was a mechanical masterpiece. And it had, going up, and on each step, on this side, 6 lions. 6 lions, 6 steps. So the symbol of his power is 6, 6, 6. And there's more 666 in Solomon the more you read. Every time God deliberately includes 666 in the scripture, what's it telling you? It's telling you that something about the person in that story will teach you about who's the final 6? Antichrist. The mark of the beast, right? The number of the beast. Remember how I said Solomon's famous for being good, but actually he's not, he's really wicked. Really wicked. And most of his story actually teaches you a lot, foreshadows a lot about what he will do. Remember, this is his reward. How does that project forward? Those who act inside God's house, like Solomon, will get the same reward. Remember, getting the mark of the beast is unavoidable, according to this. You can't hide. You will receive the mark of the beast, no matter what you do. Can't be avoided. One exception. What's the one exception? If you're already sealed. So it really comes down to, unless you're already sealed at that time, already marked for Christ, it doesn't matter whether you hide in a cave or whatever, all these things people talk about is rubbish. Why? Because it says that God himself will cause everyone else, God will cause it, that they will receive the mark. It's their reward for living like Solomon, for behaving like Solomon. That's part of the lesson. And I thought I'd point that out to you, that part of learning about Solomon teaches you things that will show you about the character of Antichrist is to come. So, I might just jump out of sequence here, but to ask, so if he's so wicked, why did God put him on the throne? Well, let me answer you like this. How could Satan be sure that he will get to have Antichrist on the throne in Jerusalem? How can Satan be sure that his false Messiah will get to rule from Jerusalem? He can be sure. How can he be sure? It's just as God promised David unconditionally that Solomon would attain the throne. But keeping it would be conditional. The same with Satan. God has spoken unconditionally that Antichrist will come and he will sit on the throne. But the same applies. Keeping the throne is conditional on keeping God's law. Will Antichrist do that? No. So unconditionally he'll attain it, but he doesn't get to keep it. Exactly what happened with Solomon. So getting the throne was from an unconditional promise. Keeping it, he lost because he didn't meet the requirements for keeping it. Again, this is pointing to why we don't worry. I keep meeting people who keep thinking, what can we do to stop it, to stop Antichrist coming? What can you do to stop Antichrist coming? Nothing. Why? Because God said he has to come. Should we worry? Only if you're not a Christian. If you are a Christian, what can you be sure of? You can be sure that he won't be able to keep the throne any more than Solomon can. Does that make sense? I'm just saying this, not really our topic, but I'm just saying this so you can understand what Solomon's there mostly to teach us about things yet to come. Now, so he's got truckloads of gold, close to 20 tons. And old money, that's about, I think it's about 23 old-fashioned tons, American tons of gold every year. That's only from Tyre and Sidon. On top of that, every other nation, including Egypt, paid him what's called tribute. So what you do is you send lots of money so that if I'm already sending you lots of money, there's no need for you to invade me. Why attack me when I'm already sending you lots of money? So I just keep paying you tribute. So this is apart from what all the nations around also sent him. You see why he's famous for being wealthy? I don't know what 19 tons of gold would be worth now, but it's a lot, isn't it? About $40 billion a year. Why are you smiling, Raniel? Are you thinking? So you can see why he's famous for being loaded, right? Now, the woman. Bottom of page 3. 1 Kings 11. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. And they were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your heart after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. So I got that wrong. That's 1,000. 700 wives plus 300 concubines. So he had 1,000. So just imagine, if he was being even-handed, you'd get to spend half a day with him a year.
365 days.
365 days, so you get about half a day a year until it was your turn again. So you can see he was a really sincere and loving and committed kind of husband. Right? But more importantly, do you see what the scripture said there? He disobeyed God. Because God had commanded, no Jewish man must marry anyone from these people. Why? What does it say there? Because those women will turn your heart away from God to their God. Remember a while back we talked about Balaam the prophet and how to try and stop the Israelites passing through Balak's country, he told Balak, get your woman to go down and seduce them and lead them astray. And of course, like men do, all these good-looking women turned up, their brains fell out their ears onto the floor. That's what happened. So that's what God was warning about. You mustn't let your desire for these women, in other words, lust, take over from your brain. Because the consequence will be they will lead you away from me, from God. Is there a Christian version of this? This is ancient, right? Does this appear in the New Testament? Does it? Can anyone tell me how? Because it's there. What does it look like in the New Testament? It's through Paul. Paul gives an instruction to Christians in general, but Christian women, and do not be unevenly yoked. Do not be yoked with an unbeliever. It's for the same reason. Because now your relationship with God and your relationship with them will now be. So instead of it being like a 3-person, the contract of marriage should have 3 people in it. You, your husband, and God, all the same agenda. But now it's you and your God, and her God, trying to cohabitate. 2 gods with different agendas. And to please your God, you will end up having to displease her, then have domestic chaos. Your life turns to hell, so you start trying to please her, which then doesn't please God. He ignored that 1,000 times completely. You couldn't really more completely ignore it than 1,000 times. But to please them, how could he please them? Well, it couldn't be with his time, because as we just said, if he was being even with his time, you get to see your husband half a day once a year. Is that going to satisfy you? I know some women would probably say that's half a day too much, but not really. So what does he do? I can't give you my time. What else would you like? Well, I don't share your faith, so it'd be really good if I had somewhere to go where I could worship my God, and sometimes it'd be really good if you came with me. So what does he do? Oh yeah, okay. I'll build you a temple for Molech. I'll build you a temple for Ashtoreth. So all these pagan temples got built all over the land by the king who approved worship of these foreign gods in Israel. Where's all this going? Good. What's the commandment? You shall have no other God beside me. Anything. And if you're the king, the most influence on the people, it's all the worse, isn't it? And what's driving him? Trying to appease his 700 wives, 300. What's the lesson for us? Unfortunately, the civil law won't let you have it. But what's the lesson for us? Firstly, is what Paul said. Don't be unevenly yoked. You're just cruising for a bruising. But more important, wider than that. You can't let an earthly relationship have more place than your heavenly. Relationships that become God's rivals will tear you to pieces. Because trying to be loyal to 2 things that are actually at odds will at best make you a hypocrite. At worst, you will go la-la trying to be like 2 people in one body. That's the fundamental lesson. And you see, just as his wives led him astray, if your relationship with your career, if your relationship with your unsaved friends, if you let that gain too much weight, so it's not that you shouldn't have unsaved friends or a career. The problem becomes where it starts to become so weighty for you that it becomes a rival. Now you're in trouble. That makes sense? And Solomon turns to be like the difference between your career being a girlfriend and marrying it. Where it only gets that extra weight. So you can have that lightweight relationship with your career like a girlfriend. But if it becomes serious, like a marriage, where your career becomes locked to problems. If your work then starts asking you to do things that you have to disobey God, think that won't happen? So the rest of that you can read for yourself in that box there. But in essence, buckles to his wives. And then in verse 9, the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. And although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, now take note of what God says to him. Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you, and to give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. Remember what he promised David? that the whole of Solomon's life there'd be peace. God won't break that promise. It was unconditional. So he says to Solomon, you've had it, sonny. You're going to lose the kingdom, but not while you're alive, because I made your father a promise. But the second you're dead, your kingdom is going to slip from your, from your line. Because having made the promise, God won't break it. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from you, but will give him meaning David, one tribe, for the sake of David my servant and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Chris, that's the answer to your question. Why is there two kingdoms? Because for this disobedience, not a tiny disobedience, massive disobedience, not just worshipping other gods, but building the temples, everything. You would think that God would simply end that royal line. But he can't. Why can't he? Because he promised David that you will always have one of the line on the throne. Then he promised David that Solomon would have the throne and that Solomon's family, David's family, would always have the throne. Having made the promise, God made it impossible for himself to completely erase them. So what does he do? I'm going to take 10 out of the 12 tribes away, and I'm going to keep one main tribe and ultimately a little baby tribe in order to keep my promise to David. So it's the closest God can come to completely taking the kingdom away from your family because of your wickedness without him breaking his previous promise. What does that tell you about God? He keeps his promise, but here's the important things. Even in the face of the kind of wickedness and evil that if it was us, we would say, oh, I know I made that promise, but you know what? Now that you've done this, forget it. That's what we would say. For sure we would say. God is not like us. So having made an unconditional, he won't permit himself to break it. So he comes as near to completely expelling them as he can without breaking the promise he had already made. Before we come back, we just want to look at wisdom, because Solomon's supposed to be wise, right? And I think because of the time, if you, in your own time, see the box there on page 4, you can read that for yourself. It's quite long, but it goes like this. Solomon prays to God and says, I'm small, I'm young. Both things are true. And yet you've made me king because of the promise you made to my father. So Solomon knows the only reason he's there is because of this promise that God made his father. It's nothing Solomon's done. But he's really conscious that he's supposed to be king and he doesn't feel like he's got the skill set to be king. So he prays and asks God for something really important. He says, make me wise. Make me able to discern between right and wrong. Does anyone, without reading it, does anyone remember what God says? How does God respond? What's that?
Remember exactly.
In the nutshell?
You didn't ask for the money and fame and all that.
That's it. So God's really happy that he didn't ask for the things that humans usually ask for. You know? Oh, Lord, I'm the king, so give me wealth, give me, this, that, and the other thing. He didn't ask for any of that. He asked for the wisdom to rule. So God says, because you've asked me for the right thing, not only am I going to make you wiser than anyone who ever lived or will live again, I'm not only going to give you what you asked for, but I'm also going to give you wealth and influence and power and peace. The things you didn't ask for, but I'm going to throw that in because you asked for the right thing. I'm going to throw these other things in. And if you look at his life, God kept that promise because he didn't make that conditional. It was an unconditional promise. And Solomon's wisdom became famous everywhere that humans breathe. But there's one specific incident that the scripture records as an example of his ability to make righteous judgments. Can anyone? The baby? Yeah? How does it go? No?
No, one month. 2 women.
There's two women.
one child.
There's two women. There's two children.
One died.
One died.
He saw it. Yes.
So the one whose baby died in the night, she went and swapped her dead baby for the other woman's live baby. And when they woke up in the morning, the woman who'd had her child stolen realised something would happen and went to the king for justice. But the other woman saying, no, she's lying. It's her baby's died and she's trying to take my baby off me. The opposite won't actually happen. What does Solomon say? Chop the baby in half and have half each. And on the face of it, you think, what? How's that wise? But he's watching. One woman sits there like, the other woman is like, no. Let the other woman have it then. Don't hurt the child. Let the other woman have it then. Even though it's her child that she's... Then Solomon said, you are the mother. You had the mother's reaction. The other woman couldn't care because she's not the mother. It's not her child they'd be chopping in half. So you take the child and you get lost. So that's the kind of wisdom he was known for. But he is famous not just in Judaism but throughout the known world, and he turns up everywhere. He's really, really big in things like Masonic Lodge. Solomon's a big deal there. He's really big in Islam. Really big in Islam. He's really big in Baha'i. Major prophet in Baha'i. So because the nations all around knew about his wisdom and his wealth. And because his reputation went ahead of him, there was this one girl, somebody mentioned her already, that was so fascinated that even though that she herself was extremely wealthy and powerful, she decided to come and see for herself this amazingly wise and rich guy. And her name was the Queen of Sheba. So where's Sheba? Africa. It's modern day Ethiopia. So modern day Ethiopia is the kingdom of the Queen of Sheba. So here's a little pop quiz for you. If you go to Ethiopia today, what is the most dominant religion and has been since the time of Solomon? That's a clue. Since the time of Solomon. Ethiopians are mostly Jews. Why? She was so impressed, she took Judaism home. She was so impressed with Solomon, she took Judaism home, and the royal family of Ethiopia descended to this day are practicing Jews. That's why in the New Testament you keep seeing Ethiopians turning up in the story. What are they doing in Israel? It's normal for them. Ethiopians are largely Jewish, until modern times they would be the largest Jewish population in Israel itself. They even claim to be the caretakers of the Ark of the Covenant. There's a little building in the capital of Ethiopia that no one is allowed to go in. It's guarded by a priest, and they don't let anyone in there, and they claim that the Ark is in there. It used to be a replica. The Queen of Sheba took a replica home with her. But they claim that when the temple was attacked by the Babylonians, that Jeremiah had the real ark moved there for safety, they claim. Very unlikely. Gets better than that. Remember what a randy old goat Solomon is? 1,000 wives? Well, you weren't safe even if you're a visitor, because the other Ethiopian tradition is that the son of the Queen of Sheba, who became the next king after her, his father was Solomon. She was only visiting. Okay, so to this day, the Ethiopians consider themselves associated with Israel, and that Solomon is the father of that king, the mother, the Queen of Sheba, who started this Jewish line of kings that go down to this until 1940 something or other was when the last king. There was a revolution that got. Have you heard of Haile Selassie? It's the one that Bob Marley was really into. Anyway, they had a coup, so they haven't had a king since. But until then, till modern times, all Jewish. What else can you say about this wisdom? Well, the stories that arise in the other cultures, especially Islam. What does it, you won't know this, but take a wild guess what Solomon's most famous for in Islam, Baha'i, and some of the other really pagan cultures that are gone now, but from their writings, they all wrote about him. He's supposed to be a man of God, right? What do you think he impressed them as having the ability to do most? That they were deeply... Something worse than that. Hollywood picks up on this. Who's heard of the Seal of Solomon? It's a ring. They say that he possessed this ring, and it had a special symbol on it, which was a pentagram. And by the power of this seal, a seal is like a, when you seal a letter, you push like a ring into the hot wax, so that's why it's called a seal. It's a ring. That this ring had special power that gave Solomon the ability to do something. Well, the clue is the symbol on it's a pentagram. Guess what they say he could do? He could command jinn. Jinn is an Arabic word. Jinn is what you and I call demons. They consider him the greatest sorcerer of his day, a commander of demons, able to make demons do his will. This is what Solomon is famous for in the nations and the cultures around him. In so many cultures that it's very unlikely that it's not based on. But remember, we think of him as a man of God, but he's building temples to every pagan demonic deity going. He's the ultimate licorice allsort. He's a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of everything going. So if he was able to do occult things, it probably wouldn't be that surprising, would it? And they were always trying to steal this ring in the belief that if you could get hold of the ring, you could command the demonic world, and that would make you as powerful as Solomon. This turns up at the movies, and you've probably seen it. A ring. If you could get hold of it, it would make you all wise, all powerful, Lord of the Rings. The ring in Lord of the Rings. Who wrote Lord of the Rings? Tolkien, a Christian. Where did he get his inspiration from? The Bible. Where did he dream up the ring from? Solomon. The ring in Lord of the Rings is a fictional type of the legend of this ring that Solomon possessed. And that if you could steal it and wear it, you would gain extraordinary demonic power. Okay? So Solomon turns up at Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings. None of these things I knew, really. So eventually, what do you think God does? He's got 1,000 wives contrary to God's instruction. He's worshipping every other god and he's permitting it, even promoting it, to keep his wives happy. He's doing business with Egypt and he's focused on money. Sex and money is what drives Solomon, in a nutshell, to where he doesn't care religious anything, whatever keeps people happy. So he's religious in the sense of, whatever makes you happy, just so long as I'm getting my dough and I've got all the woman I want. Like some sort of rock star. Like Benny Hinn, How do you think God sees this? Is he happy? Is Solomon more righteous than David? Because David was pretty wicked. He screwed up a lot. But Solomon leaves David in the dust for wickedness. He didn't do any of the good things his father did. Probably the one thing he did in obedience is he built the temple. Just about everything else he does in direct contradiction to God. Remember what we said before? The bit of the promise that was unconditional, God kept. You'll have the throne for your whole life and there will be peace. That happened. Why? Because it wasn't conditional on anything. The bit that was conditional was for this to go on, you must obey my commands. You must teach others to obey my commands. Did Solomon do that? No, dead opposite. So look what God says. Page 5, 1 Kings 11. Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. God promises them, I'm going to take away what I gave you, but not in your lifetime, remember, because he promised David that his whole life there'd be peace in the land. How's God going to do it? Well, God comes and visits another guy whose name is Jeroboam. Jeroboam is unrelated to Solomon. He's unrelated means what? He's not of the line of David. He's not actually even Jewish, not strictly. You'll read about him at the bottom of page 5. I'll just read it for speed. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials, a Ephraimite from Zeredah, and his mother was a widow named Zeruah. His mother's name is really important. Zeruah is is connected to the Hebrew name for a hornet. You know what I mean by a hornet? You get bees.
Yeah.
Been stung by a bee? Have you been stung by a wasp? Yeah. So which is worse, a bee sting or a wasp sting? By far. So you got bees, wasps, hornets. Hornets will kill you. The venom from a hornet, you can go into like toxic shock in your house. His mother's name comes from the same root as the Hebrew word for a hornet. The only place in the Bible where hornets are mentioned is where God sends them against his enemies as judgment. So this woman whose name means hornet has a son. God's going to use him. Guess what for? Judgment. And he is a pretty smart guy, and he's actually helping Solomon build all this work that he's doing in Jerusalem. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing, and when Solomon saw how well the young man did his work, he put him in charge of the whole labour force of the tribes of Joseph. About that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahiah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him on the way wearing a new cloak. A new cloak's important. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahiah took off the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, take 10 pieces for yourself. But this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you, how many? 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen, out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have one tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decree and the laws as David, Solomon's father, did. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him a ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, who obeyed my commands and decrees. I will take the kingdom from his son's hand and give you 10 tribes. I will give one tribe to his son, so that David, my servant, may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you, and I will rule over you, and your heart's desires. You will be king over Israel. All of that's unconditional. There's not a single condition in there. That's God saying, I will, I will, I will, I will. Now we switch. If you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes, by obeying my decrees and commands as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Solomon, hearing about this, tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt. And he stayed there until Solomon's death. What's God just done? Why a new cloak? Why does the prophet come wearing a new cloak? If you understand what happens with Elijah, the cloak is a symbol of their anointing, God's presence. A new cloak is a picture of like God saying a new order. A new order. And it's not going to be unified. He says what? He tears it into 12 pieces, one piece for each tribe. Then he says God is going to keep one for himself, but 10, don't worry about the maths, 10 and 1 equals 11. There's 12 tribes. What's the other? What does it add up? The other tribes, Benjamin. It's tiny, and so tiny that it was always treated as part of the land given to them is right next to Judah, and they were so small that they were always treated as part of Judah. So wherever Judah went, Benjamin went. So God is saying, by default, I'm taking 10 away. One significant one is going to remain, and through them I'll keep my promise to David, that you will always have a son on the throne. Who's that? Judah. Benjamin always goes with Judah, just doesn't get mentioned here. That's a given. So Benjamin and Judah will remain safe in Jerusalem with God's authority over them. The other 10, he says to this guy who's no one really, unconditionally, I'm going to make you king over 10 tribes. You'll be their ruler. You'll be their king. All this is unconditional. But not until Solomon dies, because I made his father a promise. But as soon as he's dead, and his son thinks he's going to be king over the 12, not going to happen. I'm going to give 10 of the tribes to you because I'm angry. As a punishment for Solomon's sin, I'm going to take 10 of the tribes away from his family. They will only rule over one, Judah, basically, and Benjamin. What did this guy do to earn it? Nothing. God just picked him. There's a conditional part, though. Did you hear it? If you don't do what Solomon did, if you do what David did, keep my commands, be faithful, be righteous, then I'll make you a kingdom that rivals David's. The Messiah will still come from David's side. That's why he says, but not forever. That he will humble David under you, but not forever. Because ultimately, God knows he has other promises to keep. So even though it's one tribe, it's still the tribe that Messiah will come from. But he says to Jeroboam, you do it right, sunshine, and I'll make you awesome. And your kingdom will be as awesome as David's. All you have to do is be a good boy and a righteous king and keep my commands. That's it. What did God know already? It wasn't a prayer of that. Jeroboam was a wicked guy, right? Nevertheless, Solomon dies. What should happen now? His eldest son should take over. His name is Rehoboam. There's Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam arises to become king as soon as Solomon dies. All the people come to him. They know that they can't do anything about Solomon because Solomon's ruling by God's decree. But remember how I said, in spite of his reputation, Solomon's a bit of a scumbag. You know, he's egotistical, he's self-centered. It's all about money, sex, money, and power. He's not really ever doing anything much for the people, just for his wives. If you're an ordinary person, he's not a great king. Seeing he's dead, and his son's taking over, you know, like to take a stab in the dark what the people say to his son? Huh? Close. They say, your old man treated us really badly. We know he was king by God's command, but he was rubbish. You know? And we hated being under him. So if you want to be king, you have to back up and treat us properly. And especially you have to make our lives less harsh. So if you're into politics today, you will hear this same old tale comes out every time we have a change of government. People are always saying, oh, you know, I'll vote for you, but you have to lower my taxes. Everyone's always after a better deal from the government. If you want to be government, you've got to make life easier for me. Lower my taxes, blah, blah, blah. That's what they said to Rehoboam. Well, Rehoboam is Solomon's son. So guess what Rehoboam says? No way! You'll pay as much tax as before, maybe more. So, 10 tribes, to his horror, 10 tribes say, well, you're not going to be our king then. And they left. And at the same time, this Jeroboam guy, realising that this is the time God had spoken to him through the prophet, he says, come over here. I'll be your king and I'll give you everything that you want. And because God is actually the one driving this by his Spirit, to Rehoboam's horror, just as the prophet had said, everyone except Judah and Benjamin cross over and make and crown Jeroboam, this guy who's just been, in charge of a building site. Suddenly, he's the king of 10 of the tribes, and Rehoboam is left with just Judah and Benjamin, just as God said. Now, what happens next? You can read it in here, but I'm just going to paraphrase. You can't all be in Jerusalem, right? You're fit for a start. The tribes that live in Jerusalem the tribe that lives in Jerusalem is who? Judah. And right next to it is Benjamin. So the only people that Rehoboam, Solomon's son, can rule are the people who live around the temple, God's dwelling place. Everyone else lives out in the countryside. So Jeroboam knows he can't have a rival palace in Jerusalem. So he goes as far away as he can, way up north, to a place called Bethel. And he makes a temple there. Then at the southern end of his kingdom, he makes a second one at a place called Dan. You would have heard of Tel Dan, the Mount of Dan. At both of these places, he gets his own priesthood, builds these temples for worship. He builds an altar in each place, but it's not the priest from the temple, so he has to just appoint people who aren't really priests to be priests there. What's the problem with that? God commanded only the Levites could present sacrifices, even the Levites. Where did God say the sacrifices had to be made? At Jerusalem. This is in Jerusalem. And you didn't have the temple, you only had these altars. He was afraid that people would miss worshipping there. So what did he do? He gave them something they were really familiar with, thanks to Solomon. He said, you can, and this is really important to understand what's happening today. He says, you are Jews, so you must worship Yahweh, but it's okay, since you can't go to the temple in Jerusalem and do it like they do there, you can worship Yahweh by making sacrifices to these 2 golden bulls. Like a bull, like a cow. So he had these 2 enormous statues, golden statues of a bull. One at Bethel, one at Dan. So you went to whichever was closer. Those bulls are how the pagans worship Ashtaroth. So he had them worship using Yahweh's name, but in the way that the pagans worship their demonic deity. That's what happens in church today. Places like Bethel, Bethel Reading. So they are using the name of Jesus, but their worship, their practice, is pagan. Hillsong, the same. They use his name, but the practice is pagan. They are doing what the Israelites did, worshipping the true God in a pagan way. What did God do? We let them get away with that for several generations of kings. They got worse and worse. He sent them prophets. And the prophets, what do you think the prophets said to them? You're one of the 12 tribes. You're supposed to worship Yahweh the way Yahweh said. What did they do? Oh no, we like it like this. Go away. Their kings became more and more and more wicked. you got to one guy, I don't know whether you call him wicked or just stupid, or both. But the guy that probably takes the crown for being dumb and wicked is a king called Ahab. And what made him exceptionally dumb is he did what Solomon did. He fell for a foreign woman, and her name was Jezebel. Jezebel appears in the book of Revelation. Her name, she is the prototype, the poster child for the worship of demons. To keep her happy, this is Solomon replaying. To keep her happy, he let her bring 400 prophets from her homeland and priests and build temples to her God. Next thing you know, the whole of the 10 tribes are worshipping her God. Exactly what happened with Solomon. So what does God do? He tells them in the end, because you have done this, and he'd sent prophet after prophet after prophet, because you have done this, I've had it with you. Just had it. I can keep my promises to the patriarchs and to David with Judah. But you guys, your blessing only was conditional on obeying me and hanging out with Judah. But since you've done this, I'm washing my hands of you. I'm going to divorce you. That's literally the words he uses. I'm going to want you again. So in other words, I'm going to cancel the covenant. And how he does it, he said, I'm going to send a nation against you that you will not be able to stop. To rub salt in the wound to make it more insulting, he took a nation that would be like Tonga invading the USA. And everybody go, oh yeah, I'd like to see that. Well, that's what they were like when they discovered that it was the Assyrians. Because at that time, Assyria would be like Tonga, and they turn up, and who wins? The Tongans win. You know, and the USA becomes part of Tonga. The scale of what happened. They were just blown. They couldn't believe it. Why? Because God was with the Assyrians to defeat his people because it's judgment. The Assyrians, he put it into their minds that the way to stop them rebelling is don't let them stay in the land. They're all in the land together, they'll conspire against you and rebel. So he didn't just give them Israel, he let the Assyrians conquer most of the known world, all the way down to Egypt. They tried to conquer Judah, God wouldn't let them. We've done that before. Remember Sennacherib turning up at the gates of Jerusalem and God stopping them? So he let Assyria conquer everywhere except Judah, which was under his protection because of the promise. So he puts it in the minds of the Assyrians, scatter them so they can't get together. So the Assyrians basically emptied the north of just about everybody and sent some here, some there, because their empire was so huge. And they were in exile so long that they culturally blended with the people they were exiled to over centuries, and they lost their sense of identity. And most importantly, they forgot what tribe they were. So they remembered vaguely that they were Jewish, but they couldn't remember what tribe after a few generations. Some of them eventually came back and lived again in northern Israel. But even those that didn't leave, because they left some there, but to fill up the population, they sent lots of their own people to live there. So even in that land, you get this mixed breed of people who still sort of worship Yahweh, but not the same way as God had said. By the time of Jesus, what are their names? They are the Samaritans. Remember the Samaritan woman at the well? Jesus said to her, your tradition is that you should worship on this mountain, and the Jews were still worshiping Yahweh, but you worship this way and the Jews worship that way. That's how it came about. The Samaritans was left of the 10 tribes who weren't exiled. The rest was scattered to stop them getting together to rebel. And after some generations, they were so intermingled with the nations they were scattered to, they just lost their identity. And because they lost their specific identity, what tribe I belong to, That's why people talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. It's not lost as in no one knows where they went. That's not what it means. It means that their identity as separate tribes. So they just became scattered Jewish people all over the Assyrian Empire, who after a time couldn't even tell you what tribe they had come from. So beyond knowing that their ancestors were Jewish, they didn't tell you anymore. Only Judah remained. One of the places the Assyrians were allowed to conquer was a tiny little place that would be like, if Tonga was small, this would be like Niue, a nothing place. And that place was called Babylon. At that time, Babylon was nothing. When Judah did even worse sins than Israel, what did God do? He shifted his power from the Assyrians to this little nothing place called Babylon. He gave the Babylonians the power to conquer Assyria, and the Judeans went into exile in Babylon for 70 years until, remember, this is what you'll read about in Jeremiah. And then when they came back, that's when the second temple was rebuilt. But here's the thing, after all this time in exile, and then when the Romans did it again, remember in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed again, and the Roman Empire does what the Assyrians did, emptied the land of people and scattered them across the Roman Empire so they couldn't get together and rebel. That's how you got Jews as far away as Russia. That's why there's Jews all over the world. You thank the Roman Empire for that. The same thing happened, but now it included the Judeans. So now, no Jew on earth can tell you what tribe they none. Because in exile, all that knowledge was lost. No Jew on earth can tell you. And you might think, what a terrible thing. Except it's prophecy. Because God said, when I relent, when I bring you back to save you, I will make you one people, not 12 tribes, one people, under one king, under one God. How will he bring them back? To be Christ. 1948, it started to happen. Now, they're all back in the land as one people because they can't separate themselves into 12 tribes because no one knows what tribe they're from. So that prophecy has already started to be fulfilled. Back in the land, no longer as 12 tribes, just one people. Ultimately, the rest will be fulfilled where they'll be under one king. So you see, David's sin escalated into Solomon's sin, punished in the time of Rehoboam, ending in the 10 tribes being scattered. So what started with David being a bad boy ends with everyone being rooted out. But the bit I want you to understand is God's purpose, the things he said he would unconditionally do. Did you notice that in spite of all this incredible wickedness and disobedience, the bits that mattered, God just drove through like a steamroller through the middle of it. So, what's the lesson for us? There's lots of lessons in it, but this is the one I want you to take away, and we'll end with this. When you're reading the scripture, or if God makes you a promise, if the Spirit of God speaks to you and really convicts you that he's promising you something, you have to do something that hardly anybody in church does. You absolutely have to make sure you understand whether it's an unconditional or a conditional one. Because if it's God saying by himself, I will, then it's guaranteed. But if you do this, I'll do that, it's a huge mistake to sit back and think, oh well, it's all right, God's promised to do that. No, he hasn't. He's promised to do it if you do the thing he asked. I see this in church all the time. People claiming stuff. Oh, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. No, it doesn't. It says he'll do that if you do this and you're not doing it. And they wonder why, where's he gone? Why hasn't he done it? He hasn't done it because you haven't done what he said. It's the simplest thing. But so many church people I know are just somehow unaware that there's two quite separate classes of promise. The one you can just bank on and no amount of disobedience by the world or anybody can stop it. You know, like the fact that Jesus will come back and all those things, unconditionally. Then the things where what we bang on about here all the time about obedience is the key. If you want him to do the thing he's promised, if it's one of those, you have to do the thing. So, where's Chris? Does that answer your question? Good. Okay. So, any further questions? Just ask Chris. Next week, am I right in thinking, Faith? Am I right in thinking it's for you? Is that good next week? Okay, so it's even younger than the young ones next week. And then we only have till, I think it's about the 20th of December or something. I got the email yesterday, I have to read it properly until they will do their usual close down for a few weeks here. You know, like they always do over Christmas. So we don't have actually that many more this year, but we'll try and. So if you have a topic like Chris's, because that's a really good topic. Did you find it interesting? I hope so. Just ask or do it yourself, and I'll listen. Even better. But yeah, so because unless God says differently, I'm not 100% sure what He wants me to talk about next. So let's see. But if something comes to you, because remember, it's not about me, it's about us. Him and us, not him and me. So, you know, if God speaks to you or something comes on your heart, it's like, oh, you know, what's that about?
Harvest.
Harvest. Harvest. Oh, okay. Yep, so that's your topic next week. No, I'm just kidding.
Probably extended.
So again, I'll try and be ready next week, and if you know something happens in the sky, tell me in time so I can. Otherwise, it's us. Can we? Is Murray still here? And I keep forgetting his name. So her horrible sister, as horrible as she is an even more horrible partner. It sounds like he might be possibly terminally ill. So we're told to pray for even our enemies. So, and they're not Christian, they're not anything you can know. Nevertheless, let's pray for Lisa and for keep forgetting Shane, is it? And also for Maurice and Dee, who are both still not well. And anything else you want to pipe up and pray for, please do. Just like 5 minutes, so let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you, Lord, that the things that you have promised on oath by yourself, calling on heaven as your witness, you will do, and nothing can deter you, nothing can stop you. You are the potter and not the clay. The clay cannot dictate to you the end, but you will dictate to the clay what you will make in your hands and how it will be in the end. We thank you for those things, but for the things you made conditional, Lord, we pray and ask that you would give us wisdom and discernment and the grace and the power of your Spirit to carry out what is right and not what is wrong, to be faithful even to the end. With this in mind, Lord, we remember your command to us to be slow to anger, to be quick to forgive, and to be concerned for the faith, even of the worst of our enemies. And Lord, we lift up Lisa and Shane. Lord, there's no point pretending that they're good people. They're not. They're extremely wicked in their lifestyle and their treatment of the people, not least Maurice. So, Lord, we agree with you that they're wicked. We agree with you that they're sinners, but we save sin. Thank you, Lord, that sometimes you use disaster to bring people to repentance, to grind them down to where their own pride and arrogance collapses, Lord, and they might at last understand how they are really before you. So we ask, Lord, that you would use the situation with those to at least give them, Lord, that you would put your Spirit upon them and convict them, Lord, of sin and of righteousness and of judgment, Lord, and cause them to understand that they are not in charge, that you are, that they are accountable to you, same as us, that just because they don't profess you, So we pray and ask for mercy, Lord, but the kind of mercy that brings about repentance and real salvation. Not merely healing for the sake of healing, but that you will bring about a righteous end that would save them. Not only that, Lord, but be an influence of those they influence, Lord, their kids and other people that at the moment they influence for evil. And pray, Lord, that what you do with them will bring about salvation and good. We pray for Maurice herself, and we ask that you really heal her and lift this burden from her, because we thank you that you are God, that you are Messiah. We share your concern with her and it's your own. Nevertheless, Lord, we pray and ask that you would bless her life, that you would really give her joy, the joy of salvation. Also, Dee, Lord, struggling with the hay fever and her tooth, Lord, we pray that you will give your servant peace, that you make a way for her to get healing quickly, speedy resolution to her tooth. And look to your servant Celeste, overwhelmed, Lord, with her wayward family. Lord, father her, be a husband to her, Lord, and protect her and lift her up. And all those, Lord, who are lonely and scattered, who are injured, who are depressed, who are disillusioned by all the wickedness going on in the world, we pray and ask, Lord, that you would remember your promise to shepherd, save, to lead your sheep. Just with all this in mind, Lord, we put the matter in your hands. We thank you that these things we have prayed out and the things we have not spoken out but are in our hearts, that we see and you know, that you will bring about a righteous end for it all, worthy of your name, worthy of the. We trust you with that, Lord, and we look to see you in his name and for his name. Anyone else want to pray about anything else? Or